So what we're looking for with good pieces of art are at scale, 300 DPI or PPI in Photoshop, or a piece of vector art that's resolution independent. It's infinitely scalable. It will be sharp at any size. It'll be sharp coming out of the output device and sharp when it's on the screen and on the press. If you're using elements of typography, we prefer that in vector. If you're doing something that's more difficult, full color, a painting or something like that, we can handle that too. We have to go about it in a more sophisticated manner, separate it into what's called simulated process. When you're designing for shirts, you want to think that this is going to be on a garment. This is going to go on an array of fibers, and be worn on the body and the round. And you want to think, not simplistically, but you want to think bold, and not that there's not room for subtlety, but you want to think of how it's going to work in screen printing, because that process has its own caveats, it has its strengths, and it has its limitations. Typically, resolution can't be made up. You can resample images, you can run algorithms that will attempt to fill in details that aren't there and smooth them out with different types of image interpolation to recreate some detail, but basically low-res files need to be redrawn for best practices. By far, native Adobe Illustrator, native Adobe Photoshop files. Aside from that, you could send in high-res TIFFs or bitmaps. If you know what you're doing and sending a single file, that's going to be already ready to be keyed into a spot color. That being said, if you started drawing this in Photoshop or something like that for more illustrative pieces, we do prefer Photoshop. For sharp graphics, we prefer Illustrator all day. We do accept Procreate files as well if you properly export them into Photoshop and you worked at print scale at 300 while you were drawing it. We will always handle the final SEP file packaging because we have a few proprietary systems that we use here, and the equipment takes it a certain way. What you just need to be conscious of is the palette that you're using. Make sure that it is appropriate for the amount of money you want to pay when it's all said and done. You're going to have that many screens plus an underbase probably. Just think about the setup. You can discuss with us about our press capacity and stuff. And if it's really advanced, we can make colors out of two colors layering on one another. Or we can make colors by cheating the shirt color. That's a very common use of saving a color, for instance. When you're working in Adobe Illustrator, you can actually get to the colors that we use. And that's located in the swatches panel. If you go to color books, you go to Pantone solid coated or solid uncoated. Those are the typical palettes that we mix to here in the shop. And you can work directly in those colors if you would like to do that more professionally. One of the shortcuts in Illustrator is actually a default action that's baked in with the software. So if you go to Window, Actions, you'll see the Actions panel. And you open up that default library, and one of the actions is called Delete Unused Panel Items. And we prefer if you run that action because it eliminates file bloat. Every time you open up something from a new template, it's going to have a whole spectrum of default process colors and some default strokes and default brushes, I think, and symbols. What that will do is take anything that you're not using, eliminate it, and trim the file down to its essentials. Typically, counterintuitively even, We prefer RGB files to CMYK across the board because you're starting with more color information than with a CMYK file every single time. What you deal with is the color space has a gamut, which is the limitation of the range of color that can be displayed or reproduced in the file. And we have processes that will take from the wider gamut and reduce proportionately to what our machines can reproduce. So we prefer RGB. Even if we're printing your file in CMYK, we will convert it with the proper dot gain custom profiles in order to try and print that out with a better chance at the fidelity that we received the original in. Send your file over at scale at 300 ppi or in vector format, so we don't need to worry about resolution. Think about what kind of colors you're using as you design it, because we're going to need to use that typically reduced color palette to print with on press. Think about having your types, your typography outlined. We don't want live fonts, because if it's not licensable by us or already in our library, then the file will be broken. Embed all of your images, or if they're linked, please send the linked image in a packaged file with your wrapper file submission. The rest we can take from here, even if it's not separated per se. We have the ability to color separate in-house and produce films and screens from what you sent us.